Hello, and welcome to Technically Speaking, a podcast where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge, and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Laura, and in this episode, I'm joined by Antonia, Ghalia, and Aneeqa to talk about the carbon footprint of digital communication and our online presence, and offer our points of view on some different types of communication and the impact they have on carbon emissions. So, to start off with, Ghalia, tell us one interesting thing you found out about your digital presence or one oddity you would like to share with us.
Like most people, I've tried to become conscious of my carbon footprint. And so I debate, do I use my car or public transport? But I never thought about my carbon footprint when I send an email. And I read an article talking about, you could calculate what your carbon footprint is just based on the number of emails you send. I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you need energy to sustain your device, and there's actually energy required to send the email. But I think that I dissociated emails with the wider kind of carbon discussion. And I in part of the article, I read that if you send 65 emails, it's roughly equivalent to driving 1 kilometer in a car. Now, I didn't fact check this, but just the fact that you can associate your emails to like driving your car in any way made me feel like, oh dear, like I actually do need to think about my carbon footprint when it comes to my digital like presence. I was actually quite shocked.
And I think we're all sending more emails than ever these days.
100%.
I think I get, that like Pavlovian response, like when they hear a bell, when I hear the Outlook, I just literally start getting palpitations. It's just constant.
And because of COVID, I feel like I have to be extra polite. So if someone sends me something and I'll just respond with thanks, even though it's not necessary at all. But I try to be kind of extra nice during these times.
Yeah, I definitely tried to do that because when I started my job, I only had been there 3 months before we went into lockdown. So most people wouldn't know me. So I felt like I had to be really nice in email just so that we could have this connection somehow.
Hope you're well. Keep well and safe. Those are my standard emails.
So I think I might be one of the more ruder emailers because I've never understood like, why are you starting your email off with "How are you"? You clearly aren't that interested because you have no other questions to ask. I also don't tend to send thank you emails. Maybe I should now, or maybe not if that does really increase your carbon footprint.
Saving the planet, Laura.
Yeah.
My rudeness is eco-friendly.
Just put that in your signature.
Yeah, in the signature when it says, think about the environment before you print, you could just be like, think about the environment before you print or respond.
I want that. It's such a get out of jail free card for not replying to so many emails. I'm definitely going to use that.
But then again, see, I would actually, rather than having a long, protracted email conversation, I would probably rather pick up the phone. It's a lot quicker and you get a lot more meaning because you can hear whether someone's like being sarcastic or whether they're joking or how serious they are about what they're saying from their tone of voice. And I can imagine that like, using the phone in some instances is actually more energy efficient or more carbon friendly. Coining a new term as well, carbon friendly. I had read a landline, not that I have a landline in this house anymore, but if I did have one, its voltage requirement and the amount of amps it requires are actually pretty low. So the total power consumption, it's way less than a watt. So over 24 hours, it's a very small fraction of a kilowatt hour. Cordless phone uses 10 times more than a landline in terms of kilowatt hours. I can't really convert that into a carbon footprint because that depends on your energy source. But I can imagine that those numbers compare quite favorably to sending multiple emails throughout a day for a 2-minute conversation maybe.
I just hate picking up the phone and speaking to people because I feel like they'll want a response straight away. And with an email, I'm like hiding behind my screen. So it's easier for me. It might be carbon friendlier to ring, but I think for my well-being, I still have to write an email.
That is true. You do get more of a chance to think about how you want to respond in an email. But I think I overthink it as well because I'm conscious of the fact that people can't hear my tone of voice. So then I'm like, does that sound sarcastic? It's not meant to, but does it? I don't know. I question myself. Aneeqa, what about you? How do you feel about your online digital presence and how that is related to your carbon footprint?
In the last year, I have watched a lot of videos, a lot of Pakistani dramas on YouTube, a lot of Netflix. So I was really keen to find out what the impact of watching all those videos was on my carbon footprint. First of all, I found it very hard to get a number. So many different sources had so many different numbers. But in the end, I found a calculator on the International Energy Authority website to calculate the carbon footprint of streaming a video for an hour. And I chose this just because they'd stated what their methodology was and what assumptions they made, which a lot of places hadn't. So you could find out, depending on which country country you were from, what device you were using, what the carbon footprint was. For the UK, streaming 1 hour of HD video is 33 grams on a 50-inch LED TV. But if you use your smartphone, that would only be 6 grams. So it was really device dependent, I found. So there were a lot of other factors, but the device seemed to have the biggest impact, as well as which country you were. So like the world average is 67 grams for a 50-inch TV and 12 grams for a smart. The UK is a bit lower than that. And I guess that's because of our energy mix. We fortunately do rely a bit more on renewables than some other places. But yeah, it varies hugely depending on what device you use and which country.
My kind of day-to-day work doesn't require me to look at carbon numbers a lot. And so when I saw things where like grams or kilograms, I couldn't quite imagine what that meant. I didn't know if that's a lot. I had no idea, to be honest. I found it quite hard to like work out how bad I was.
Putting into context is really difficult. Like to me, 6 grams doesn't sound that lot carbon. And I watch most of my videos on my phone, or I have stuff on the background, like when I'm working, like I might be playing music, things like that. And is that bad? Should I be using a music streaming service instead of having the music videos playing on YouTube, or a podcast streaming service instead? Would that be better? Would it be a matter of grams difference? And is that really the biggest?
Or what if you use radio instead of the internet as well?
Yeah, I do have an old analog radio. That's a really good point, Antonia.
The average UK person's footprint is about 15 tons per year. So 6 grams, that's quite a lot of hours of streaming, isn't it?
Is that more or less hours than there are in a year if I watch videos continuously?
I can try and do a back of the envelope calculation.
Let's do a back of the envelope conversation. I love it. Science and maths in real time. No pressure, Antonia.
I was trying to do this before we started to check some of my numbers, and I just massively confused myself. And they weren't even difficult calculations. I'm just not used to doing maths anymore, I think.
But I think that's one of the issues as well, Laura, because honestly, the numbers vary so much from site to site. And I wouldn't be surprised if, it's the assumptions they've made. And I'm sure people make mistakes in their calculations or in the assumptions they make as well. And this is proving how tricky it is to calculate these things.
So even if you streamed for the whole year, constantly on your mobile phone, you get 52 kilograms.
That's nothing.
You're streaming, Aneeqa.
But that 6 grams, was that just for your energy use, or does that include the materials to make your smartphone and how we get rid of the smartphone afterwards?
I hadn't thought of that, actually. I'm not sure if it includes the construction of the technology and disposal.
That's the problem with all these carbon footprints, is to what scope do they fit in? Are they just looking at the use stage? Do they consider the manufacturing stage, the raw material gathering? What assumptions go into it?
And then I think that's what makes the comparisons difficult. So like Ghalia mentioned before, how many emails?
65 emails was equivalent to 1 kilometer.
65 emails was equivalent to driving 1 kilometer in the car. But then coming back to Antonia's point, does that include the manufacture of the car, maintenance of the car, disposal? Likewise for the email, does it include whatever device you type that email on? We have to think a lot deeper about things, I guess.
I wonder in some instances if the article that Ghalia read was sort of deliberately picking a comparison that made her stop and think that, hang on a second, maybe I should pay more attention to my digital carbon footprint. Maybe that was the intent in portraying it that way, and it seemed to have the desired effect.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's stated, for example, sending 1 email is equivalent to 4 grams of CO2 emissions, and just in the electricity responsible for that. And for me at the time, I was like, cool. But like, you're right in that the comparison made me stop and think and be like, oh, how are my emails being compared to driving a car? Wow, like I didn't think they were even comparable.
We need those things to put things in context, because like now we said, oh, what does 6 grams of CO2, what does that mean? We don't know. But then comparisons like that do help people put things into context. So maybe in those ways they are useful, even if they're not fully accurate.
But say if we were going backwards to like before we had emails, what was the alternative? Just sending a letter?
When I thought about the car situation, I was thinking, okay, if I wrote letters, well, I know for a fact I would write incredibly less letters. So I wouldn't be communicating that much. So I'd send a letter a day. But how can that be compared to like the tens of emails I'd send in one day? So I think that like, although it's easy to compare, like, okay, one letter, the carbon emissions, if you like, of 1 letter compared to 1 email, I think that's an interesting comparison. But I think most of us write way more emails than we do with like sending out letters.
They will have to travel more than 1 kilometer. Assuming the person you're writing the letter to is more than 1 kilometer away, they might travel thousands and thousands of kilometers, maybe by boat, maybe by plane, depending on where they're going. So in that way, then maybe email is better because it's avoiding us having to ship these letters all over the world.
I bet no one's done that life cycle analysis though of an email versus a carrier pigeon.
Carrier pigeon. Sending in a bottle across the ocean.
But the carbon footprint of like raising animals is quite high because we have to feed them. Actually, carrier pigeon might not be not a car, but it's not free.
That's very true.
I guess even before letters, they used to physically walk to places, right?
I love how like the world is going like more globalized and everything. We're like going back to basics. Like, can we run to the person to send them the message?
Speaking of travel, we're all traveling a lot less at the minute. I used to travel a lot to conferences previously. Obviously can't do that, so now all online. And I think that makes a difference to like the quality of what I get out of the conference. It's just really difficult to like strike up a conversation with someone in passing over coffee because I'm just sat in my kitchen on my own and everyone else is doing the same thing.
Yeah, very awkward because then it does feel like you're very purposefully contacting someone. You're going, hi, specific person. Whereas at a conference, you kind of mill around, you kind of see, oh, what, you might overhear what they're talking about first before deciding, oh, actually, I'm going to join this circle of conversation. Instead, now you have to have a purpose, and it's really extroverted.
I've not made a single contact from an online conference that I've been to this whole time. I've made loads of connections through like one-to-one emails or one-to-one sessions and discussions, and I think they're really useful. I just don't think anyone's figured out how to recreate that thing that Antonia was talking about, that kind of serendipity, just meeting someone next to the plate of brownies and like starting up a conversation that leads to collaboration or something like that. I don't think anyone can recreate that online very easily.
Which I guess may say something about maybe research outputs in science and engineering in what sort of 5 or 6 years' time because I think the younger researchers in particular benefit a lot from those networking opportunities. And what effect will that have on their career? Will it hinder it or not? I guess only time will tell.
So this pandemic has kind of forced us to rethink how we do site visits. And, we can only have a certain amount of people in a building. So what we've done at work, we've like strapped a GoPro on someone's head. And then we can just watch them as they go around a site. And it sounds good because obviously it's more accessible. Lots of people can see it and they can like live stream it, and we can kind of work out the carbon footprint of that compared to people going to site. But I do feel like having watched someone through their like GoPro and actually being out on site, it does make a difference. You don't kind of appreciate the kind of like access routes or access problems or the scale of some of the issues when you're not physically there out on site. So I do think that like it's quite good that we're able to be kind of that accessible, making sure that we're continuing our work, but at the same time, are we losing out on something a bit like your networking just because we're kind of online?
It reminds me of, okay, this is not an advert for Microsoft, but in all these videos I'm streaming, I keep getting a Microsoft Teams advert about this like coffee company and how they've shifted everything online, and they do like their coffee tasting online now. And so Microsoft Teams has like this virtual background feature, and you just see all these people who are like placed on this virtual background, which is like a coffee like a bar table, like on bar stools. So it puts all their faces, and then when they're drinking their coffee, it looks like they're all sat together drinking coffee, which they've done a really good job because it's affected me, their advert. I'm like, wow, this looks amazing. I want to do a virtual coffee tasting with these guys. It doesn't look awkward or weird like any other of these like virtual coffee mornings that people have. But like, I think they've just done a good like job in their like marketing department. But they're saying they reach more people, that it's more accessible, but it's not the same, is it? Like, you can't just smell the coffee like that other people have made for you. And
what if we started making it actually into VR though? Can you imagine how that would work? Someone was telling me about a really awkward work social where instead of being physically together during COVID, they had avatars that physically moved around a room, or they drove cars as a little activity, and they had their little like corporate headshot driving the car. If we started getting down that virtual reality route, would it be a little bit more like real life?
But then I guess the question is that what is the carbon footprint of that? How much more is it than just the GoPro on someone's head?
It's not quite VR, but I did find that in video calling or video conferencing, if you turn off your video, again, who knows if what the assumptions were going behind this, but it could reduce it by 90% of the carbon emissions. That was.
Oh wow.
So forget putting on proper clothes and like tidying up your background, just turn off the video for carbon emissions sake.
Because I can imagine VR being very intensive. I did a VR game like years ago. I'm sure it's like progressed since then, but it's like you're holding on to things, you've got like the goggles on, but it feels so real. And that was like a few years ago, but it does feel like I was screaming. It's like one of those VR gaming places, and like the people working there must just like laugh constantly at all these idiots like playing these games and thinking they're being attacked by monsters.
Like, I know what you're saying, Antonia, in that like you switch your cameras off and stuff, but at the same time, we kind of still want that human interaction. So like, you know, imagine me never switching my camera on, my manager would never see me because I've never met him. And I think it's kind of balancing that, like, are we trying to go for a zero carbon footprint process, in which case that's like quite difficult. We're really not there yet. Or what's kind of the okay compromise? I've not read anything that this is kind of where we should be heading in terms of our carbon presence online. Like what's kind of like okay and acceptable? Because I don't think we're going to be in a position, at least not presently, in a situation where we're just going to have no carbon footprint from our online presence. And it's just trying to work out actually kind of what is acceptable and what isn't. And I think the first thing is actually understanding what is our carbon footprint online and how easy is it to kind of work it out. And I think that's what's quite hard at the moment.
I wonder what's the carbon footprint of this podcast episode
Oh, yeah.
that we're recording now.
Yep.
I attempted to work it out based on people downloading this episode, based on some numbers that they didn't really explain their assumptions behind them. So given that our episodes are typically about 25 minutes long, and they're only about 15 meg, it works out as like a really tiny number of kilowatts per episode. Converting that by an average CO2 emission, which again is probably not all that accurate if it's an average based on different energy sources. It works out with something like 4 grams of CO2 per downloaded episode. So that's pretty small. But again, you're quite right, factoring in that we're all sitting here with our videos on, cameras on Zoom, and then I have to spend time editing the episode afterwards on my computer and then uploading it. The upfront carbon cost of the episode could be quite a bit bigger, I guess.
So, Laura, you said it was 4 grams of carbon emissions.
4 grams of CO2 per episode downloaded, yeah.
So that's equivalent to, according to this one website that I was on, that's equivalent to 1 email being sent, the electricity needed to send 1 email. So you downloading this is equivalent to sending an email.
That seems wrong, because just from the pure like data size, emails are mostly text, whereas we've got audio, which if it's like 15 megabytes. So what I saw was one research pointed out that energy use in IT isn't that efficient because it's like a train. It doesn't matter how full the train is, it just goes. So even if we're sending like a small amount or a big amount, it's just always on. So actually, maybe it doesn't matter if we have our video on or not, because it's still going to do the same thing.
Yeah, I want to know, like, so say you have something running in the back, because we can't see it, but it's like Schrodinger's video. Is the video actually moving when you're not looking at it? Or do you have to look at it for it to be moving? I don't know. I assume it is moving. Do you know what I mean?
No.
Not quite.
I feel like you've gone into like Inception, and I'm not quite on it.
Say I've got a video, because I always have videos playing in the background, but I can't watch them when like I have another window open in front of them.
I see what you mean. I thought you meant if you're just not looking at the screen.
Yeah, I thought you meant if you it's like that classic, if a tree falls in a forest, did it really fall if there's no one seeing it or whatever? I was just like, this is too much philosophy for me right now.
Yeah, like, so if I had it side by side, the video is playing and it's all the pictures are moving and it's downloading it. But if I have it on in the background with another window in front, is that the same? I assume it's the same. I don't know why it would be any different. It's just me, I can't see it, right?
I would think so. I would assume that process is still running on your machine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But imagine if we could code in a way that it wouldn't. Wouldn't that be great? So like say it could, like your computer can detect that you're only listening to this in the background. So turn off the video. And then when you go back onto it, the video comes back on just to reduce the amount of data you're using. I think that would be such a great way of coding. Maybe we need green coding. Does that exist?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that like kind of links onto the fact that I'm very much guilty of this. I usually have like a billion tabs open. I have so many different things going on, and I know things are running in the background. It's completely unnecessary, but that's just a bad habit that I have. So if we were able to like code something to make everything else just like stop, the only thing that I'm looking at is the only thing that's needed, I think that would really help. Oh, I can just change my habit. I mean, there is also that other option.
I think mobiles kind of have that built in just because of how much processing power that they have. That it just doesn't play in the background. You're like, oh, okay, this app is just closed because I stopped using it for a bit and the battery saver came on. So maybe if we had that but more widely, on computers, we only have 2 eyeballs, but the computer is playing 20 videos at the same time. The worst, actually, adverts that play in the background, right?
I hate them. And 4OD, they only play when you have the tab open. So there is this stuff, because I realized, because I've been watching a lot of the OC, I found out it was on 4OD, and the adverts only play when the window's open. If you minimize it so that it can just run in the background, the adverts stop playing until you open the window again. So this technology exists.
Channel 4, share your technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be able to get an ad blocker for 4 on demand years and years ago, and they kind of found a way around it. Just made me stop using it.
I didn't regularly use it until I found out the OC was on there, which shows you my taste in television. It's absolutely trash, but it was nice nostalgia.
Yeah, I don't think we should really get into guilty pleasures of streaming media. That's taking a terribly wrong turn. One of the things about adverts in video is on all my social media feeds, I turn off autoplay videos, mostly because if I really want to watch it, I'll click on it, but also because I feel like it's just unnecessarily consuming bandwidth and therefore increasing my carbon footprint.
I feel like these have come about because we wanted to save energy. So it's actually quite handy having one use of it, actually having a further use on our carbon footprint.
We were talking about putting things in context as well, and we've talked a lot about the carbon footprint of our digital presence, but I suppose it's worth putting that into the bigger picture.
So I had a quick peruse on several different websites. My understanding is that every little helps, but it's not that big of a deal compared to a lot of the other industries.
I think I saw something about if all of the internet was a country, it was quite a significant country. I've forgotten what country comparable to, but global emissions wise, it's 4%. I saw one website that said 3.8%, another place said 3.7%. Surprisingly close, actually, considering all the other conversations we had about carbon footprints and how close they are. This one was closer.
Yeah, I think what is interesting in our case is that we don't have to wait until, for example, the infrastructure world. We're at a place where we've built a lot of infrastructure. Now we're thinking retrospectively about carbon, like the carbon, embodied carbon, I guess, in a lot of infrastructure. And it's a case now, okay, we're already thinking about this as an issue. So we're only going to be online more and more. The pandemic probably has rushed it a little bit than what we kind of initially anticipated. So I guess it's kind of on us now to look, okay, we're only going to be online more and more. What can we do? Both in terms of our own habits, in terms of kind of the whole life thing that we were talking about before, in terms of the infrastructure which we build around it. And I think it's kind of just taking a bit of responsibility for our actions at the moment and kind of seeing where it's going in the future. I think that's kind of the way I see it, because the small little things we're doing might not be big, but in the grand scheme of things. But I think if we're all kind of, the whole world's kind of getting more in line, then it's something that we should probably be thinking about.
And I think what Antonia said as well before about not just the data transfer, but the whole life cycle of the manufacturing, transport, disposal of all the devices we're using as well. I'm sure if we incorporate all that into the life cycle, that significantly increases the carbon footprint. And okay, you might say, oh, just the data transfer doesn't, it's a couple of grams, but we wouldn't be transferring data if we didn't have all of these devices, right? So it's really important to think of the whole big picture.
It sounds like we're all sort of agreed that our digital footprints actually don't contribute a massive amount to our entire carbon footprint, but it's still something that's worth thinking about. And if there are ways that you can reduce your carbon footprint from your online presence, then maybe you should. At the very least, it might make you feel a little bit better about what you're doing, or you just look into it and see what your carbon footprint actually is. I also think that's kind of how we got where we are now. It was all these little actions from all these people around the globe that kind of led to the climate emergency that we're now facing. And it'll be all these little actions and this collective efforts combined from these little actions that will get us out of it. And I think that's probably a good place to end this episode. The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.